Now then, young'un, what's they got planned for today's interview? Well, sir, I have my good friend Squid, fellow caster. He is going to come on and talk about lots of things, how to be a caster and some of the hardships of working within the lower levels of online Counter-Strike. It's quite a spicy one, actually. He gets into some pretty good topics, and we really, once again, similar to the Tea Time interview, relate on a lot of those topics. And I quite like how this one went as well. Pretty podcasty in vibe. Maybe the next couple interviews will get back to that more solid interview style, sir. Well, young'un, I don't know what casting is, but sounds really good. If I were on the YouTube, I would be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you. No, sir, thank you for your kind words and imparting of your wisdom, sir. Yo, what is up? Don't know how you feel about that funny beginning. It's not the extent of my ideas, and I promise big things. But that's just a little quick one that I put together. I need to take a day. I need to finally get some stuff recorded that will fit. Maybe get outside or whatever. Anyway, like I said, if you didn't catch it, just to reiterate, I am here in this interview with Squid in just a secchi. Another caster, another good friend of mine, and we get into some slightly harder topics, perhaps, to talk about when it comes to being a commentator and whatnot, particularly in the online realms. Obviously, everybody's online at the moment, but that kind of mid-level casting, both in terms of teams and tournaments and whatnot that you're working on. So we get into some of the hardships of that, some of the difficulties of that. Certainly some things that you will have heard before from higher-end casters, but also some of the own issues that we have, right? Some of the unique issues that we have. It's really good. Another more laid-back podcast, bit more input from me. I think I'm going to try and get some guests on, maybe some players and stuff, right? That I can really just delve deep and ask them question after question after question, and try and get some really interesting answers out from them. But we're getting there. We're getting there, and I'm pumping them out, and I'm happier and happier and happier with my end every following episode. Constant improvement is being felt. Big block as well, I think, of recording going to come in the next week or so, because I do have some casting stuff coming up. Make sure you follow the Twitter so you can see what it is, because that's all I'm going to say. It's pretty good. There's some pretty good stuff coming up. But either way, enough from me. Let's get into the interview. Welcome, everybody, to another sit-down with Skriv. I am joined today by my good friend Jamie, also known as Squid. And kicking things straight off, getting straight into the questions, my friend. For those that perhaps don't know the full extent of your history, maybe you can give us a rundown as to how you got into casting, and then also maybe some of the reasons why you decided to get into casting.
So yeah, obviously I am Squid. No intro, no chit chat or anything. We'll just get
down
into
I'm
the
straight
business,
in.
right?
I do a cheeky little intro video.
You do the preview,
one-on-one
right?
beforehand, right? So there's a nice little preview, before we get into it.
Yeah, either way, I've been casting for 4 years now. I've worked with StarLadder, ESL, like a bunch of online organizations mostly. I held a full-time post down in London for an esports company for a year, and over in Germany for Allied Esports International back in 2017, 2018, so a couple of years ago now. In the meantime, I've been freelance since, I guess, October of last year, so almost coming up on a year and a half. And I mean, like, a lot's changed in the industry in that time, right? Like, lots of stuff has happened. It's been a very rocky year. Like, I guess that most of my freelance, or pretty much all of my freelance career, has been like during the pandemic. So there hasn't been the opportunity to go to LANs, to do all of these offline events. It's pretty much been exclusively online for all of this period, which, I mean, it definitely has its challenges, has its benefits as well. It means that you get to see your family every day, something I maybe didn't have the luxury of doing when I was working abroad or other side of the country. You don't often get to see those people nearly as much as you'd want to, whereas you're online, you're maybe making less money. Maybe not. It's always a little bit different, right? But that's kind of the struggles of both. And I think right now I'm just looking to do my best work. I think I'm having this kind of like change, Skriv, where before it was maybe too much about the money, too much about the quantity, and not enough about the quality. And maybe that's something that I need to be like looking at over in the next year. I think as a freelance caster as well, you always have these kind of like conundrums. Like, you have to bring your philosophy, not just to the broadcast and not just to the cast, but in the way that you do business and the way that you interact with people. Maybe in the previous years, I didn't see the benefit of like having loads of friends in esports and being able to chit chat with somebody and like a bunch of people, and the joys of joint negotiating instead of just having to negotiate on your own. And everything kind of comes with challenges, right? Like I've just recently realized that the challenges of trying to do a duo as well, and how that's a compromise. So yeah, it's been an exciting year. It's been a difficult year as well. Probably one of the more difficult years I've had in esports. I don't know, perhaps the most difficult year in esports, to be honest. But also a successful year where I worked like more than I probably wanted to. I think I'll probably tone that back going into 2021. At the same time, I feel like I sit here like on calls, maybe privately with you, Skriv, and say, right, I'm going to tone down how much work I'm going to do. I'm not going to do 4 best of 3s a day. I'm not going to do even like 7 days a week or anything. I'm not going to do all of this like crazy stuff. And then the opportunity comes along and you feel like, I have to take this. Like I have to just jump in both feet. And you can't turn down opportunities, otherwise you kind of get like shunned out some of the time. And that's maybe nobody's fault. Maybe that's just the case outside of esports in the whole of the entertainment industry. But when you're like a freelance commentator, you don't have that job security, right? So sometimes you just have to take those opportunities. So maybe that was a bit of a long-winded answer, and I like veered off of the rails a little bit. But that's kind of maybe a brief intro to who I am.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's absolutely fine, you know, if you want to go off and have that stream of consciousness, absolutely. But yeah, there's a lot in there, right, that I think particularly you talk about at the end there, the freelancing side of things, relevancy is a fear, I suppose, or losing it and whatnot. And something that Richard Lewis said the other day resonated with me quite well, where he mentioned some kind of hiring and whatnot that he'd done in the past, and the thought process of tournament organizers and stuff like that at the time. And he said that, you know, you're only as good as your last gig, so to speak. And I think it is relatively true. Obviously, it's not really, unless you do something completely drastic or whatever. It's not that extreme, but I think it's very much the message, the image, and the success, I suppose, of your previous work that's going to continue to propel you forwards. It's quite hard. It is quite hard to, like you say, turn things down and try and focus more on the quality. But then at the same time, I feel it's quite important, because if you are just going for the quantity side of things, you can form some bad habits, get stuck in a rut, as they say, right, is quite a common one, I suppose, amongst us casters and whatnot. and it can be really, really difficult. Do you think like focusing more so on your skill as a commentator is at the top of the pile when it comes to that priority list? There are obviously other areas like, you know, your networking and content creation, perhaps, stuff like that. Do you think it is the ability side of things that comes towards the top?
I think it should be. I think if you're a aspiring commentator, you need to kind of be realistic and say, right, how do I get better? I think that is like there's many ways to do that, right? You actually watch back your own broadcasts. I feel like commentators in general see that as like a massive slog. Like, I don't need to watch the broadcast. Like, I was there, I did it, right? Like, I remember how that broadcast went. I knew if it was good or bad, but you never really know how a broadcast sounds from a viewer's perspective until you actually watch it back yourself, until you put yourself in the viewer's shoes. And I feel like maybe not enough commentators do that. They don't pay enough attention to doing that. I know that like sometimes, like, no names mentioned or whatever, but different people that I've worked in the past, it's quite hard to get people to sit down and put that time in. And some of the problem there is overworking, by the way. Like, if you're working an 8-10 hour show, the last thing that you want to do is sit down and put that 1 hour in after, which is, by the way, the most important hour of the whole day. Like, if breakfast is the most important meal of the day that gets you ready and everything, like that wrap up, that post-mortem, let's say, is actually the most important because it prepares you for the next broadcast. It sets you up. You know what actually went wrong. Whereas if you don't do that, then you're completely going to forget about all of the issues that actually like took place. Oh, I blundered these words. Like, oh, I'm saying this word all of the time. The pacing, the throws are totally off. Like, there are certain aspects of casting that you just cannot improve on unless you watch back, you get the pen and paper out. Mine's right here, Skriv, and you just watch back your broadcasts. You put that emphasis in. And like, there's no incentive to do that, right? Like, inherently, like, you're not getting paid to do that. Like, we show up, we get a day rate. You do that hour or two afterwards. That's an hour or two of your own time that people should see as an investment rather than seeing it as, okay, right, this is just extra work, right? This isn't going to do anything for me. And I think that's like quality is so important when you get to that. And you see people kind of join the scene, and maybe other casters shun that person and they make massive strides incredibly quickly sometimes. And that's off the back when you actually sit down and talk to them, by a lot of the work that you don't see, a lot of the work that they do when they're not on camera, not on broadcast. Like, there's that great Mike Tyson quote, which might even just be fake news, that like he wanted to like wake up at 4 a.m. because his opponents were sleeping. I know that wasn't a quote, and that kind of energized him and made him want to it got him ready. It gave him an edge over his opponents, I think the quote was. And like, I know that I've totally butchered that, Skriv, but you know what I mean.
I get the energy of it, right? I get the idea behind it. I think a lot of what you're saying, though, when it comes to quite a natural job that this is, quite a natural role that this is, you know, when you're having to come in with some analysis, make it nice and succinct, right? Or, of course, talking quickly can be very, very difficult. You've got to roll those things off and make sure that, you know, you're not making those general mistakes that you have kind of in the back of your mind with your like crutch words, as you mentioned, right, is quite again another common one among casters. And even just little phrases, those natural things that you do, whether it's in the way you structure sentences or the way you talk or the words that you use, they will like slip in and you just don't notice that you're doing it unless it's incredibly prominent. You know, I went through a little phase of saying "to be fair" a bit too much, right? You know, and a bit is fair,
that is
another
a common one.
Yeah, well, exactly, you know. But that comes from the fact that I was also saying it a lot in general conversation. So then moving into commentary, when those conversational moments came about, you know, perhaps we were talking about the previous round, then it would come into play. But it did also stick out like a sore thumb to me. There is going to be things, or there are going to be things that do not stick out as readily, as cleanly. But yeah, I think that ability as a commentator, it's very, very difficult. And like you say, some people make strides very quickly. Others prefer to do, and I'll admit I'm kind of in this camp as well. Prefer to do things a bit more organically, as it were. And I would say, I mean, the post-mortem kind of thing definitely does happen for me, particularly when I'm working with someone who I do so regularly, or perhaps Keith, in our partnership and whatnot. When we've come off of a long day or like a really good game that we feel not only it was exciting, but we did a good job as well. But when it comes to like that VOD reviewing and stuff, I don't know, I don't like it. It's difficult, listening back to yourself and whatnot. It's a weird experience.
Yeah, nobody likes it. Nobody gets any joy out of actually watching themselves cast. People might think, right, casters, they have the biggest egos of all time. They just would love to listen to themselves talk all day. But when you actually boil it down, I don't think that any real caster actually enjoys watching it back. The thing that I enjoy from watching it back is seeing the improvements happening following on from that, when you actually go to the review next time and say, right, that was an issue that we had that we have been able to iron out. And sometimes I feel like you said that you like to watch back the best broadcasts. I think that the most powerful thing to do is actually watch back the worst broadcasts.
Right.
Because your best broadcasts, you're going to have far less issues. There's not going to be, you're right, it's actually not nearly as constructive as going back over the bad broadcasts that were a real nightmare to do, that you're just kind of like clock watching, when's this one going to end? And you just don't get your pace going, or there's something going on, right? That's something that people don't realize. Like casters, like real lives too, they, at the end of the day, you never know what's happened just before a broadcast, just after a broadcast. You don't know what is actually gonna impact and make that broadcast a lot worse. I think back to the point of watching back your bad broadcasts, that is when you kind of get the most benefit, in my opinion. When you look back over that, you say, right, the energy was so wrong. What are the systems that we can put in place when this happens in the future that is actually going to bail us out of this trouble, that's actually going to save this broadcast and not just make it monotonous for the viewers? Because at the end of the day, to quote Richard again, you are only as good as your last gig. And if your last gig was dog shit, then you're only as good as dog shit, according to Richard Lewis.
Well,
so
it's very quick how things can turn around, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
And when you cast to a certain standard, the audience, the employers begin to expect that certain standard, and maybe you can dip under it, but going kind of too far under, and not hitting at the very least your base level, can have dire effects. And I think it's something that we've seen a little bit of trouble with in this online era with some of the ESL broadcasts, where you can tell there are some games, there are some days where it has become so grueling for them that the level that viewers, particularly, I think people like you and I who also understand where that comes from, but some of the viewers, they're very expectant. They want what they want, really. And it can be a little bit harsh. But moving forwards into our next question here. When it comes to casting, when it comes to maybe not necessarily within esports, could be commentary in general, could be hosts or whatever, but I am interested to know who some of your inspirations are, some of the people that you have learnt from, and perhaps applied some of their strengths to your casting style.
So I would say, the obvious ones, Sadakist and Anders, when I was kind of growing up, definitely were inspirational to me. And definitely kind of Anders, especially because that was kind of the era that I came from when I was a fan. He was the guy who would kind of get me excited about the game, who would bring that hype, bring that style that I really enjoy. And maybe the less obvious ones is outside of esports. And I feel like when you watch broadcasts outside of esports, as like Sadekis talks about many times. That's where his main inspirations came from, because I guess when he was starting commentary, remember, that wasn't like a long list of esports commentators. Right now you could probably pick from like 100 guys from multiple different games. I'll admit I don't watch a lot of different esports. I solely watch CS, to be perfectly honest. Outside of esports, I would say somebody like Joe Rogan, who kind of says it as it is. I think he's a great commentator, obviously a color for UFC, so in a different role to me or you, for instance. But like, he brings that energy, he brings that hype, and there are sort of single things that you can learn, these commonalities between casters in every single field, which is they absolutely love their games, they absolutely seem to love their jobs, and when that kind of spark dies, that's when you're probably like you're approaching your sell-by date. You're starting to get a little bit of a whiff at that point. I think outside of esports, that's where you can bring your best like comparisons. And when you watch those broadcasts, when you watch a UFC broadcast, or when you watch maybe a football or any of these other sports, that's when you can take things directly from those guys and learn what they're doing and apply it to yourself. Without it being like inherently like you're not actually stealing stuff, right? You're learning, right, this is when he's throwing, this is like how quickly he's receiving that throw. Like in an exciting moment, he's going to pick up that throw absolutely straight away. Like, unless you've got a crowd around you who you can feed off that energy, and you can kind of like, if a big play happens, you can let it go silent and let the crowd fill that void. If you go silent after a big moment on an online broadcast, it's going to sound incredibly awkward. And these are things that you can kind of pick up on just from watching like sports commentators. I'd say that John McEnroe and people from like tennis as well, maybe one that might like surprise you, because like it's not my style whatsoever. Definitely somebody who I like, maybe don't like look up to, but definitely like appreciate as a commentator. He's got his own succinct style. I think that's another part of it as well, having your own style, having your own brand, being unique. Right now in the industry, there's maybe like 150 commentators like competing for your job, Skriv. So it's about being unique, making a viewer remember you, making the TO who's actually hiring you remember you. I think that those are all really important things as well. And it's very easy to say, like sit here and say it. We all know it. But to actually do those things, to actually spend every single day working on content, branding, how am I going to be different? Like, those are hard things to actually put into practice.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a lot of that difficulty when it comes to, finding your style, making sure that you put that into place, and you talk about uniqueness, that you're not drawing too much from your inspirations, as it were, and just sounding a bit like a copy kind of thing. And then the content creation, I mean, is absolutely paramount at the moment to get ahead, to have an edge over the competition, like we've talked about here so far. And I think the most difficult thing, I talked about it with Brenogo as well, is kind of that getting started, getting out of the mindset of like, who's going to watch my stuff, who's going to care, who am I kind of thing, like if I want to make an opinion piece or whatever, I don't have the following, the reputability of a Thorin, for example, but I think it is pretty important to get out of that mindset. I mentioned a lot of this with Tea Time as well, where like, there are a lot of names, particularly in Counter-Strike, but across different games, I'm sure, that are at our level, as it were, but they have been noticed and now starting to break into, Hawk is a great example, starting to break into the upper echelons, as it were, because of that content creation. But like you say, it's really, really difficult. I've had many conversations with you as well, right? About like what to go for, what should you do, like from a play-by-play angle, is it cool to go into analysis stuff? Is that maybe going to confuse employers, or maybe, build your brand as like an analytical mind, when really all you want to do is get super excited about the big plays? And I find it quite difficult. Like, this kind of thing is relatively simple for me. Just a chat and, form some questions beforehand, and then bounce off of those initial questions and just keep it going. But when it comes to figuring out what to do in future, you know, I find it a little harder to come up with original content that A, I'll be able to do in between work, and B, will be enjoyable for me in a sense, that I'm not just doing it because there's a gap there, or I'm not just doing it because someone else has done something kind of similar. I put a bit of a spin on it, and hopefully I'll get the same kind of viewership. You know, I am in the process of thinking about other things and trying to draw ideas from other places, but one of the main things for me is something that I can definitely sort out is my editing skills are relatively lackluster. But even just in terms of like finding something that's really cool and really original, you know, shoulder content and everything as well is becoming perhaps a new angle that for the flashpoints, that if I can, you know, find something that really bangs, they may not care about my commentary stuff, but they'll be like, yo, we want you to come in, script some stuff, involve some of our talent already, and make cool shoulder content that we can use in between games.
You know what? That's like totally right. I've been having lots of discussions with Pronogo also, with like a bunch of different content creators and like esports personalities, and it does feel like that's what we are currently behind on. It feels like there are lots of casters trying to break into the content aspect right now, and maybe they're doing it in the right way, wrong way. I applaud anybody who's trying to do any sort of content whatsoever. Maybe James Wegg's a good example. They've just done, and you're another good example. They just did these tier 2 awards. They've been doing different pieces of analysis on Dwegg's Twitch and doing all of that stuff. And like, even if it hits the mark, great. Even if like you're a newer commentator and it doesn't hit the mark, then you're at least doing something and going somewhere. I think that the only real net negative thing that you can do is maybe massively opinionated pieces, which is going to burn you bridges in the industry. I think that could be a dangerous thing if you try to take that approach. I think you have to have the kind of reputation first before you go into that sort of thing. Or even if you do get to that level, maybe you should just not go into that sphere at all. It feels like the esports community doesn't really appreciate opinions at all. And then sometimes when they're like stated outright, they're like just completely shunned. So I think that's just a problem that we've got as a community. I will say, I think what Flashpoint and like even ESL recently over the last couple of months has been doing in terms of content is great. Me and like a bunch of like other caster mates sat down, watched all of the Flashpoint skits and stuff. And yeah, they were funny. Not all of them hit the mark. The ones that really did hit the mark. And I thought that they were really well produced. And at the end of the day, they're trying to do something different. I really do feel sorry for Flashpoint, you know. Like, I know that this is like completely going off topic again. Maybe this is what the sit down with Skriv's all about. We sit down, our minds go wherever. I do feel sorry for Flashpoint in the extent that they've basically had to have their 2 inaugural seasons like during the pandemic, when they haven't been able to do 90% of the stuff that they obviously wanted to do. It's lucky that they had all of the talent in the studio for the majority of the season. For that to kind of fall apart at the end is just another really unfortunate thing. And I kind of hope that just all of those guys stick with it, at least for another year, so they can all like prove out that model. Like, that's the only thing that I would like ask for. Like, I feel like that's something that's supporting the community as well. It just feels like tier 1 is very stagnant. Tier 2, incredibly stagnant for the similar reasons. But tier 1 is stagnant right now. There needs to be development. There needs to be changes. And I feel like it's our responsibility, collective responsibility as esports people, to try and drive the industry forward. If the industry is exactly as we see it right now, in 10 years' time, it's not doing anything for anybody. Yeah, it's supporting some jobs, it's doing some good things, but we're not achieving our potential as a community at that point. It feels like we kind of need to have a bit of camaraderie, band together a little bit more, and as a community, produce the content to expand the audience, show these bigger companies. Like, I feel like E-League kind of dropping out of CS is not a big problem, but definitely a net negative for the scene. I'd have loved to see more TV companies come in, the Sky Sports. We just saw literally today when we're recording this. It depends how long those editing skills are going to take to get this one on YouTube. But
yeah, no comment.
Just today, Rocket League, it's been announced that the BBC will be showing it only on online platforms, to my knowledge. That's a really good thing. Obviously, BBC have shown CS in the past, Gfinity Elite Series, maybe some other tournaments here or there. That went to BBC Three when it went online and got cut for various political reasons.
Yeah, they did Blast on iPlayer as well.
That's
just
good.
recently.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
no,
the Premier stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's where the industry has to go to reach a wider audience, because there's lots of older people out there who maybe played CS 10 years ago who would actually watch this content that's being produced right now. People think that the average demographic, like the average age of an esports viewer, is like 17 years old. It isn't. It's way older than that. It's like, what is it? 25, 26 is the average age. Like, I'm not sure how much I buy into those numbers, and I don't know how accurate they are. I've just kind of like riffed that, but it isn't just like 15-year-old kids watching Counter-Strike. There are adults. The audience is bigger than we realize, and at the end of the day, we've got to take advantage of that, and that's our collective responsibility, right? We've got to be making the content. We've got to be calling out injustices when they occur, whether they be match fixing, whether they be TOs, whether they be individual personalities within the scene. Like, all of that stuff needs to be called out, and we need to kind of clean the scene to some sense. I feel like ESIC coming in and blanket banning a bunch of these coaches, a really good move. Like, literally the only thing that they could have done that would have been good. I think we were all thinking for like quite some time that maybe like the coach role just wouldn't exist anymore, and maybe that would even be a good thing for the time being. We thought that maybe Valve would come in with a statement. By the way, still no statement from Valve, and offer some sort of support, offer some sort of like opinion. I don't think that there is going to be an opinion as of this point. It's like I feel like the ship has already sailed on the coaching issue, and people are just focusing on the next thing now. But we've got to kind of get to grips with the integrity of the scene and what we can do to support the scene in terms of content, in terms of like making our scene more professional and not making it more corporate, making it more buttoned up. I'm not talking about that whatsoever. I'm talking about having the financial support to make content, for TOs to take a bit of initiative and to take a risk, and to be able to say, right, you guys, Skriv, whoever else, you get a podcast, you get an Oprah style, and be able to support the scene in that respect. I think that's the real issue with the tier 2 scene as well. Like let's sort out tier 1 first, but once we kind of get that model down and established, like, we need to take a good hard look at what a lot of the TOs are actually doing in tier 2, because again, it's oversaturation. It's the same thing over and over again. It's very stale, very stagnant, and all of the integrity has just gone. Like, I don't know why we're not talking about this, but at the end of the day, you look at the Twitch chat, there's not even like hate about the casters anymore. It is just calling out match fixing, calling out cheating, calling out XYZ. And that's a real problem. And we need ESIC and actual personalities within the scene to kind of get to grips with this issue, prove to the viewer that, right, the matches that you're betting on right now, there is integrity. Like this is a fair match that you're betting on. Whether there's an upset or whether the favorites win in quadruple dozen overtime, we need to be able to prove that all of this CS is legit. And sometimes we can't do that.
Yeah, so there's a lot to touch on there. I think one of the things for me, perhaps with like, organizers wanting to get in with the broadcast and whatnot, I think there are certainly pushes and moves that are being made by bigger players, and very, very recently, obviously, when it comes to like tier 2, we've seen ESEA are trying to make moves to indeed step up the quality of the broadcast and paying attention to the importance of that. But I think there is also this issue that they have, particularly in CS. I'm not sure how it goes with, the operators that work in multiple titles and whatnot. But in CS, I think part of their concern is going to be making sure that they get the events themselves to a profitable or a nicely profitable place. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation around teams. I think it also applies to operators that CS is difficult to monetize, and therefore I think it kind of goes in circles, if that makes sense, in the way that like you sort things on that very early entry level point, and then once you've got that done, you can move on to like more of the broadcast stuff and get that sorted as well. But it's hard. It's hard. I definitely think there is a conversation to be had about tier 2. It's like in tier 1, steps are being made in the right direction for sure, and they are seemingly down to start pushing a bit of content. I think the mindset is there at the moment. The budget, maybe not as much. And then obviously part of the difficulty with this year is you can't really go anywhere. You have to do stuff in an office or do stuff in a green screened room, which does indeed inhibit you. And some people are not going to like the content that Flashpoint have done because the backdrop looks a bit weird, or whatever, right? Like the people won't. People won't.
Mate. These people.
Well, I think the variety is certainly important, and it's kind of, do you start to push, like more separate content? You have like your funny stuff, but then you also have some content around analysis, because I think people really eat that up. Not necessarily just on the analyst desk, where it's like, here we have a weatherman. Why don't we let the person who would do the weatherman stuff have a 10-minute video that we can indeed play, right? Maybe it has multiple things in it that we can chop up and put on the broadcast itself, so we're not just playing a 10-minute video, but then outside of the broadcast on the YouTube, on the Twitch, or whatever. Because if you go and look, I think some of the Flashpoint content in terms of viewership on YouTube and whatnot, it's not directly related, let's say, to the amount of people that actually watch Flashpoint itself, right? When they're on, and perhaps when they've seen it on the broadcast, they don't then go and watch it again on YouTube. I think the one of like Maui being sexy on a pole is relatively popular, but other than that, I don't think as many of them have broken like past like the 10K mark. And I don't know if they're happy with that. I don't know if that's what they want. I don't know if, I was watching them like on the Pinnacle YouTube channel. Are they on a different YouTube channel? Right? I will hold my hands up and say if I am wrong, I'm wrong. But I think that the mindset is there when it comes to the content. But personally, the level to which we are seeing it could be higher, right? Could be better. And unfortunately, like I say, most of that I feel at the moment is just down to the fact that it's like the same heads. They maybe need someone to fully script, fully write, fully come up with ideas. They don't quite have that yet. And of course, the pandemic has held them back location-wise. But the fact that we are talking about it with Tier 1 is incredibly valuable, right? And the fact that it is indeed being pushed forwards. Because I think at the end of the day, people are just looking for as much content to consume. And we've not quite yet built up a history, so you can go back over 50 years like you maybe can in more traditional sports and consume content there. So we have to start pushing it out in droves, particularly because, again, yes, indeed, a demographic may be older than you expect, but it is still a demographic of a generation or two or three or whatever that have a lot of stimuli available to them. Whether it's, your phone or you're playing a game and watching YouTube. My friends will know I am a serial watcher of videos and ignorer of the chat and whatnot, But that kind of thing is I think really important to start pushing. And it's selective as well, because I think in between your games, right, when the analyst desk comes on, some people indeed will watch it and have a good time and consume that content. But that's the most common time for people to go off and do something else in between, that they've food, drink, toilet, whatever, right? So it's not always being hard watched. And I think having analysis content with your analyst desk, or just one of them, is going to give a much bigger edge. In terms of the tier 2 scene, I think it's a very difficult one, and something that we may well touch on a little bit later down the line is just budget, really, an allocation of.
Is it though? I think a lot of these tier 2 orgs have a lot more money than they're letting on. You kind of like ask for like 10 euros more, and it's but we don't have the money or anything. Whereas their business models are like these guys clearly have money. Some of them don't. When you're running online tournaments, apart from the prize pool and the admins who are sourced from whatever country, like you don't really have like a massive like level of cost to run those tournaments. Whereas when you look at like an ESL1 Cologne or even just a little LAN, you have to hire a venue. You've got to travel literally 100, 200, 300 people out to maybe another country or even another part of the country. Just the level of costs is so much less, and a lot of these TOs actually do have more money than they're talking about and that they let on. At the tier 1 level, if you are running those major tier events, then the chances are, yes, they are losing money hand and fist. But let's be honest, that's not down to the day rates. That's not down to the extra content that's being produced. That is literally like pocket change, what we're asking for to get this sort of content made. And maybe it's down to people like us to show TOs that this is endemic. This is what you need to be doing. Remember, I'll draw a parallel. Before, down to a story that I heard, I think on Thorin's wrap-up of Red Eye's career, that when he had started, there were no day rates. There was no subsidized travel. You would be very lucky to even get your lunch paid for you. But he believed in that industry and this industry that we currently profit from. And he would go to these events out of pocket, do his best work, and started to grow that ecosystem, the one that we all benefit from today. And it wasn't just him, it was many, like tens and tens of people who kind of founded the esports scene in that sense. Maybe it's down to us to show TOs what they're missing. Maybe it's down to content creators like Hawker, like Vu, who I think is immensely talented as well, to kind of show, who've just been picked up by DreamHack as well to do that analyst desk. They had that competition running and whatever. He ended up winning it. Like, great choice looking at the content that he's producing. Maybe it's down to those people to say, right, this is the content that I'm literally just going to produce for free. I know that that's not the best model. In an ideal world, we'd love for a TO to say, all right, Skriv, there's your 500 quid, make your video, whatever, and we'll see if it works or whatever. But maybe the investment needs to come from our end. Maybe we just need to like bend over a little bit further and make that whole model work. Maybe we don't. Like you don't know at the end of the day what the right answer is. And at the tier 2 level, it does feel like not a lot of like people actually care about the teams. Like they care about, right, I'm going to put my bet on at this point, but like it does feel like that is being like sucked and sucked and sucked. You talked about Flashpoint and that maybe they're not receiving the same level of viewership that they would ideally want, especially on their YouTube content. That is on the Flashpoint YouTube channel, by the way.
Okay, fair.
And I feel like the YouTube maybe isn't even the avenue that you are going to be getting most of your viewership from. I think literally just posting those videos on Twitter is probably the best avenue. We've kind of got to be looking at what the UFC are doing and what the Premier League is doing and what these actual like real sports, so to say, is doing with their content. The UFC, when they put in a pay-per-view, they're putting in like millions and millions of dollars into content. And it's not just, right, let's do an interview with this guy and then we'll do an interview with that guy and maybe show his childhood or whatever. It's everything. They have a team of people. They sit around a table. They properly script it. And this is good content that gets you excited for the game. This is an entertainment product. We need to be figuring out what these avenues are. And it's not like we want to rip ideas directly from the UFC. Yeah. I think one of the most promising things that Flashpoint ever came out with that was like criticized and memed upon a little bit is they were hiring like WWE writers to come in and do scripts and stuff. I think that's a great idea. I don't where did that idea go? Like that was some kind of like fanfare that came in originally.
Yeah, I think
I like that.
a lot of it was with the players, eh?
Yeah, sure.
And not being able to access them and have them face off, on camera.
You can get them both on webcam.
I mean, I guess, but
you have a face off. You have these ideas. Like I'm sure that there are things.
I think they
do with players.
They want it to punch, though. I feel
sure
from the get go and have it as quality wise, like production quality wise, I should say, as best as they possibly can. Maybe the acting takes a bit of work. Maybe the scripting takes a bit of work or whatever. But find their most active members in teams and whatnot, and then make sure that the technical stuff is not the issue. It's not a worry.
Yeah. And obviously, it would be way better to have that sort of content that I'm talking about in person with cameras. Yeah. But for the time
definitely
being,
on your tier 2 level,
you can. Yeah,
I think if you are in that tier 2 operation, because it's something actually that I think I sort of noticed when you were talking about some of the differences and costs and whatnot. There is really no upfront cost, as it were, for creating content on that tier 2 level, right? I don't know what the deal is with the green screen room. There's one.
No, really I'm saying like
let me no. Let me finish. Because there's one world where they own it, but I don't know that, or there's another world where they rent it. Is what I'm saying, right? So there's a cost there. There's a cost there. I think the green screen room is fine. It limits them, and whatnot. In my opinion, maybe they're going to stick with that, but in my opinion, I think it would be better to have some of the stuff done on a set, or some of the stuff done outside, or something like that. But for the purpose of the point I'm trying to make, it's more down to like those upfront costs, big cameras, someone to film and edit. But if you're doing it on your own, I mean, I don't know. This is something that obviously I've worked with the MDL for quite a long time, and we've had vague conversations about doing a little bit more, whether it's just a podcast with a couple casters from EU, couple casters from NA, highlight games of the week, highlight moment of the week, but I think it is hard to convince that many people to do it for free,
oh yeah, no, it's hard. Yeah.
So, and I think ultimately as well, with your Hawkers, your Vus, and bigger names when it comes to the content creation, I think it starts off as a passion project, and then it can help you further down the line to value yourself. And then if a content, if a TO wants you to create some content, you now know how much you can get it off your own back. So it then,
true.
I in the ideal world, right? You know what I mean? But people ultimately from a different source, from a different inspiration, a different person asking you to do it rather than yourself, I think it can be hard to convince people to do that for free or to do that for little benefit.
By the way, it's hard to convince any TO to do anything. Like, I've had so many conversations where I've bashed my head against the wall multiple times, trying to get like content produced, trying to like float any ideas whatsoever. Like, even if they're not the best ideas, it does feel like a lot of TOs, especially at the tier 2 level, just do not care about that sort of thing. They want to run their tournament, they want it to go as smooth as possible, and they want to like forget it ever happened and go to the next one. I don't think that's the way, Skriv, to support the tier 2 scene. Like, we need to create some sort of energy and excitement over these matches. That's how you bring the integrity that we're all kind of like wanting in the scene right now, by the way, is by having all of this build up. We want to see who the players are. And remember, this isn't tier 2 CS 5 years ago when we had never heard of any of those people. It's tier 2 CS in 2021, like top tier 1 players. They're literally like, you look at the tier 1 tournaments this year, they've included MIBR, Cloud9, like Endpoints, like genuinely high tier teams with excitement, with a fan base, like you saw MIBR playing in 9 to 5s, for instance. You saw Cloud9 playing in 9 to 5s, for instance. Like, where is the content around this? And Relog have done an okay job at putting stuff on Twitter and stuff like that. And I'm definitely not calling them out exclusively, because the problem is like kind of across the board and not with one TO or two TOs. But what I'm saying is the opportunities are there. The teams are playing in your tournaments. The players want to get their brands out there as well, by the way. Like, you don't have to pay players. You literally, one line in a contract, you donate like 1 hour of your time and we'll make some content with you. You come on our podcast, you do an interview after the show. Like, the viewers want to see who these players are, who the talent is. They want storylines. They don't just want, right, and now the next game is, drumroll please, it's this game that you saw 10, not my mic, it's this game that we saw 10 times this month. Like, that is not what you want whatsoever. It's actually detrimental to the scene. And we're just fucking ourselves, Skriv. Like, we are fucking ourselves in this industry by not supporting tier 2 at all. And to see tier 1 start to get this support, I must say that looking at the ESCA Premier press release is like a breath of fresh air. Yeah. Like, I know it's words right now, and later they need to translate that into actions. But seeing that, whether I get hired or not, is such a breath of fresh air for the tier 2 scene. It gives players and teams an opportunity to move to ESL Pro League, to the biggest tournaments in the world. The DreamHack Opens, that then opens the doors. Remember, the prize pool for that includes a Masters spot, either at DreamHack Masters or at an ESL One Cologne, or then one of those big staple tournaments of the year. There is a path now from being trash at Counter-Strike to being on a world championship stage. So, and that's something that we've wanted to do for years and years, right? And FPL was a start, and Rank S was a start. But we need this infrastructure from top to bottom. We need to support the guys at the top and the guys at the bottom as well. We need to support them to kind of rise through the scene and to grow their brands. Like, how many of these tier 2 players have played 1,000 maps of Counter-Strike and nobody's ever fucking heard of them? Like, how many of these guys are there? Like, it just seems like there are hundreds of these players who could have been getting their profile out there, their names out there. By the way, that also helps you getting picked up by bigger organizations. If you're a team owner, it helps when you want to sell that player to a Cloud9, to one of the biggest orgs in the world. It helps you from top to bottom. Making content and supporting the scene literally helps everybody.
Yeah, I mean,
there's your rant.
Yeah, fairly impassioned, isn't it? I love it. I absolutely love it. Because there's conversations with some players, you know, who like refuse to give interviews, and obviously it's understandable if you don't speak or don't feel confident with English, for example, right? If you're on one of the main, but there are some players who are capable, say like North American players, right, who don't like giving interviews just at the end of a game and whatnot, which seems kind of mental to me. And I do think there is a conversation about tier 1 and the fact that there are players there that could do.
Can we have names?
No, I don't know. I think I remember seeing like on one of Pronogo's shows, he had like the coach of Chaos on, and that coach mentioned that sometimes it was difficult to get them to do interviews and things like that. But I know that
Steel and to get these guys to.
I don't think so. I think it's like, you know, to include variety. Okay. Maybe if the organizer wanted to speak to someone specific because they've just had a pop-off game, and they don't want to, kind of thing. But I think it does happen. It's not like, you know, massively widespread. I know, you know, someone like Banks will be very open about the fact that players often give like PR answers and don't
that's true.
Give an awful lot to the broadcast, to those storylines, like you say, you know, who's someone to watch on Na'Vi. Well, I think they're all, you know, very good players. I look forward to playing against them. It's like, I mean, call someone out, you know. Obviously, the clear one would be simple on that team, but like, you know what I mean?
by the way, you look at any other sport in the world that's actually successful, this isn't a thing. In darts, you have like BM and people calling each other out and memeing about on the stage and trying to get inside your opponent's head. And I feel like that's the one thing that Flashpoint tried to bring out of people. By the way, it is going to make the scene a bit more toxic. You are going to see more drama, but people are going to be engaged. The one thing about all of the drama in Brazil is it's brought out like engagement like we've never seen before in this industry. Wouldn't you want that for every other market?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, it's like as well the
in terms
drama
of engagement, not drama.
Yeah, but in Brazil, it's fairly organic and kind of genuine, as it were. I think there is definitely a space for this, like WWE writers, where it's somewhat characterized. It doesn't necessarily have to be like damaging or toxic to the parties involved. It just, I think, butting heads and whatnot, and it happens in fighting all the time. That's a lot of what they build the
every sport, literally
mental
every sport
fight.
all the time.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously, with your boxers being like sat next to each other and stuff, they can often. And some of that will be genuine. Some of that they will kind of do it for show and be all hunky dory once they go behind the curtain together or whatever. You know what I mean? They're off camera. Sure. But yeah, I think there is certainly a lot of room for that rivalry, for that more interesting and, like I say, organic kind of content creation, perhaps. But we'll see. We'll see. I think much of what happens has to trickle down to the tier 2. A lot of the operators within the tier 2 scene, I don't think it's controversial to say, are more concerned with their bottom line, not necessarily, the
quality of their product whatsoever.
Yeah, okay.
Those are my words, not yours. But
yeah,
there you go.
No, I was gonna say that it's kind of more so about having a stable bottom line, perhaps getting above said bottom line. As I'm sure you have been told as well, that sometimes these operators that come in and then swiftly move out, or you don't see for like a year or whatever, it's because they did not earn money on their event. And unfortunately, it's
imagine literally coming into a new space that you maybe don't know a lot about and haven't run an organizer. You look at the model that other failed TOs have done before you and say, oh, we're going to copy that org that's just died. We're going to be the new version of those. Like, it makes absolutely no sense why you wouldn't come in, do something completely fresh, completely different, try and breathe some life into the scene. I feel like I didn't touch on it too much, but this ESEA press statement, I called it a breath of fresh air. It is, and not just because of the 4 seasons that get you to ESL Pro League and these DreamHack Opens every single time. It's not just about that. It's about what they've talked about in terms of the broadcasting. At the bottom, they even put in, even if it's just words, like they put it at the bottom of their press statement. So obviously it's the partner channels. So people who want to grow their own brand. One of the big issues in CS right now is if you want to grow your own brand, where do you start? Like lots and lots, pretty much 99% of TOs like close off their IP, that they don't let you use it whatsoever. Like ESCA say at the bottom of this article, we're openly inviting the community, influencers, pro players, and streamers to take advantage of cash cups and use them to create content for their own channels. And I assume that that's content provisional to ESCA Premier, as we're now calling it as well. And saying, right, if you're a content creator, come in, take our IP and make content. We want to bring eyeballs. We want to bring integrity. We want to bring all of these good things. Obviously, the partnership and the improving coverage quality, getting it done from a studio and these online studios, whatever that means. I'm not sure if that is just a couple of people over Skype, I presume, or over vMix.
Yeah, perhaps it says like virtual studio, doesn't it? So to me, that feels like perhaps they're going to do something akin to what DreamHack have been doing.
Okay.
and have, because obviously they have like a virtual arena. So, and the technology in and around like green screening and stuff like that seems to have improved a lot, even on some levels where maybe you don't need a green screen or whatever. So to me, that definitely feels like they're going to try and incorporate
great, do it.
Something that makes it feel a bit more real, because we don't know how long the pandemic is going to hinder people. But having worked with them fairly regularly, I can say that the playoffs, doing the studio from the playoff stage, is a hell of a lot earlier than usually they would include lands and whatnot. And every playoff stage as well, and it's something that budget, again, I've not been to a global challenge because usually they do them in Texas, I believe, and my flights, my rates, my hotel, not worth it. Whereas I think this is something, again, where they're being a bit smart, and they're like, okay, yes, we're in pandemic land, maybe we don't have a crowd or whatever, so the atmosphere is not as good, we don't have the players there, the atmosphere, but we can bring talent in to work in a studio, and it's a little easier for us to do 4 regular slightly stepped up broadcasts at the end of the regular season, rather than, I think, 1 or 2 a year is what the global challenge would be. Definitely 2 a year, I think.
Or 0 a year if it's
well,
20,
of course,
20.
yeah, online a year, but
yeah,
I think they are proving that there is a move to try and another thing as well is the broadcast days. We touched on this beforehand. The broadcast days themselves have been moved down from 3 to 1, so that, I feel, you're going to get a better product, yes, only on one day, but for the same, if not less money than you're already paying. Obviously, a lot of this is all conjecture. I don't know anything, right? I'm not privy to that kind of information. They've always had me as a freelancer, but I think it's interesting to see that they are making strides in the sense that they're looking to try and save money. They're looking to try and put it into other places. When it comes to talent, right? When it comes to broadcast and everything, obviously they're increasing the I suppose the finance when it comes to the tournament itself. But they're not looking to sacrifice in other areas. If anything, they're trying to step it up. And I think that the bigger operators are the bigger operators because they make decisions in smart places. And for me, it's like, I don't want to point any fingers, right, and whatnot, but some of the operators within the tier 2 scene don't quite understand, or perhaps don't quite understand sounds a bit pretentious, but like, perhaps have a different and a less successful idea about where to put prize pools, for example, how much to have, how much of an effect that has on viewership. I think, yes, indeed, you need your prize pools for your HLTV coverage, for your teams to come in and actually get involved. But I think sometimes they put too much money in from the get-go, and they've not quite built up the reputability, the loyal viewership and whatnot. And timing has to be a massive thing. If you've got a 100k tournament from new operator who's not done anything yet versus a 100k tournament from DreamHack, I, as a team, I'm going to that DreamHack event.
Of course,
because there's other things on the table, aside from the potential to do bigger DreamHack events. If it's, say, for 100k, it would probably be an open. There is also just the fact that it's like, I've worked with them. Their admins are really cool. Their server provider that they use, assuming it would be ESEA, is mega easy to work with. Their timings of games are more comfortable with me. They don't start until 12 p.m. rather than starting at 8 a.m., and
8 a.m.
I am a gamer at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Oh, those 8 a.m. broadcasts are amazing to wake up for, by the way. You have to set your alarm for 6:30 in the morning and then have a shower and come over. You're definitely putting out your best broadcast. when you're
I
showing
mean,
up at fucking 7:30 in the morning. Like,
I suppose I don't mind it as much, to be honest. I definitely think that that's like a personal thing where you should perhaps give yourself enough sleep. Now, the issue comes when you get asked to do an 8 a.m. broadcast in 24 to 48 hours. You know, that I can definitely sympathize with you, but I don't know. I suppose I'm a bit more ready to get up early for that kind of thing. But it is certainly going to be a factor, you know, for players particularly when
exactly.
Perhaps, you know, you talk about all your time differences and stuff as well. 12 p.m. start might be a 10 a.m. start for me, if you know that's the case, or an 11 a.m. start depending on where you're at. But look, I want to move on.
I can touch on that, definitely.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I can definitely touch on that because we talked about so much stuff as well, and there's so much interesting stuff there. You know, you can never get away from me, Skriv. You can't.
No, it's absolutely fine, mate.
So, firstly, the start times. Me personally, I'm not bothered as much. Like, I can wake up at any time of day and show up to a broadcast, but we've all worked with people. It doesn't just take, it's not just me on a broadcast, right? You've got a co-commentator, you've got 10 players, you've got a whole production team. You've got so many other people that you don't see and hear from. When maybe you tune into one of my shows, you think it's only me because I'm talking for 99% of the time and it doesn't look like there's anybody else around. But there are those problems trying to get other people into their best frame of mind for that time of the morning, whether it's a co-commentator, whether it's 10 different players. And that 8 a.m. game's never starting on time, even if it's 9 in Europe.
Yeah,
that's a different point entirely. For this ESEA stuff, obviously, as I said, massive breath of fresh air. You talked about a lot of stuff that's definitely very speculative. But the point is that ESEA, Mountain Dew League previously, or Premier, was the gold standard of online Counter-Strike for years. And that has been lost and diminished to some extent over the last year, 2 years, 3, 4 years. And that's something that I think, with it being brought more in-house by the sounds of things, by ESL directly, it's probably going to be run a lot better. Me and you know from working a lot of these ESL tournaments is you can criticize them all you want, but their tournaments are very well run. They've always got support. There's always admins. If I send a message to ESL while I'm doing one of their shows, I will not get I will get a response 100% of the time within 20 seconds. Every single time. There will always be support. You can't say that. How many times have I been left hanging by so many different TOs? When I'm live on their broadcasts, send a message, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, ping, 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 ping. You don't get anything back. You never, ever see that from ESL directly. I've not worked with ESEA, so I don't know if that's a problem. I'm definitely not like accusing. And by the way, a lot of the ESL admins are the ESEA admins.
Yes, I was going to say that.
But bringing it in-house and having that whole support structure and that whole team who runs events, picks talent, manages all of the teams and makes sure that everything is hunky-dory, I think that that's probably a massively positive step. And is the first season, the first 3-4 seasons, going to be perfect? No, it's not. But they're going in the right direction, and that's what I care about. Even if it is just a press release right now, and we've not seen any content, we've not seen any of this stuff that we're speculating on. The fact that they are putting their money, so to say, where their mouth is, and putting this statement out, actually doing something for the future of the scene, I think that it's really beneficial, and it gives me a little bit of hope, whereas especially in the last couple of weeks I've not had a lot of hope, to be honest, in the tier 2 scene.
Yeah, I think it's always a really weird time of year.
100%.
As well for that kind of thing, and we freelancers in general for sure certainly suffer, and I think it's going to be the next push where, like, you know, getting paid on time and whatnot was an issue across the board. I think the next push will be for, if you want to work with me, let me know in time, let me know perhaps some future stuff as well that we could get involved in, you know, and whatnot, and tie that down in writing. Again, that's something that'll come from the top end and then trickle down. May already be happening in the top end. We don't obviously know about that.
Well, it certainly is in Flashpoint, of course, and I guess a lot of these ESL guys at the top probably
I think
have
so with this year
and,
for sure, right?
Yeah. And that's going to become the new standard.
Case.
So that's definitely something to kind of look at as well. Is like Flashpoint especially have kind of set the precedent on it. Like Thorne's come out publicly and said, right, we're going to pay you within X amount of time. I feel like that time frame that he set was 3 months, but it might have even been 1 month. Like, I definitely don't want to take the credit like away from him in that sense. But he might have even said 1 month, which is very good payment terms. 3 month is pretty standard payment terms, but to guarantee that it's paid on that day, and by the looks of things, those guys have been paid early a lot of the time instead of waiting for that 3 month deadline to come rolling around, is definitely beneficial. I've got to say, like privately behind the scenes, ESL have also tightened up their payment systems. A lot of other TOs have tightened up their payment systems. It's much easier and less of a hassle to get paid for work that you've done from TOs. And I've got to say, I've never had any issues with payment from ESL, even once. So they're definitely not one of the culprits in my eyes. Like, other people might have different stories. I've never seen any of that. But with other TOs, especially lower down the food chain, that is a massive problem. And for me, Skriv, I don't have the biggest expenses in the world. This wooden plank here doesn't actually cost a lot to hang up every month. But other people, I know they've got rents. Maybe they're not the most savvy business people, so they're not making as much money as they ordinarily could be. So those paychecks are so important. They're living month to month. And as a freelance English CSGO commentator, that's very difficult, like living month to month, I guess.
Yeah, particularly, I would feel like a fair amount of us are still, in the online era, still living at home or with parental support. But if you decide to take a leap, I nearly did, for example, right? Nearly moved in like September time. Once again, pandemic, we hadn't decided on a place. We did not want to fuck around with doing it all online and not actually seeing a place, me and a friend of mine. And
is that what estate agents are doing right now? They're selling property without even
you can still move during the pandemic, and I think if you get it all sorted,
but you don't even look at the house.
Let authorities know. Well, they film, okay. And whatnot, and possibly there was a time where perhaps you could organize a viewing, but obviously at the moment, especially. And then, of course, it was all enter at your own risk, really. This is all before Christmas and whatnot, so before everything started to pick up and the super strain appeared out of nowhere. But that gives you like an added level of stress and worry, and when it comes into rates and when it, and all that kind of stuff. Henry G, when he departed, talked about the top end playing them off of each other. I think that happens in the tier 2 arena as well. There are also some operators who like to test the water, and say, well, if we drag it down by like 50%, are people still going to accept? And you and I,
yes, by the way.
Well, you and I may not, but there will be people, if they're inexperienced, if they've just started, that will take that, or if they don't know, yes, they have some experience when it comes to casting as a role, but they don't know how much they can ask for. They also don't know how easy, because you have so many, and I fell into this trap absolutely, so it's like massive projection, but you have so many young people, right, who have very little business acumen, very little knowledge of negotiation and whatnot, and are scared, of turning something down. And the whole freelance status quo is a thing anyway, in keeping your name in the hat, keeping your name at the top of the hat as well, also pretty important. But it's a case of negotiating, and some, myself included in the early days, don't do that, for fear of, piss off, we're going somewhere else, which I've had happen to me very, very recently. Not quite like that, but I gave a rate, wasn't expecting to get it, gave a second rate versus their rebuttal, and I was willing to go lower, and they went elsewhere before I was able to go lower and perhaps come to an agreement, you know? So that kind of thing happens, but then I feel, I don't think it's like on purpose, you know, it's not malicious or anything from these organizers, but there is certainly a benefit, a side benefit from them trying to perhaps cut some corners or cut some costs. It just goes down to the fact that it's like, you know, these are newer people. They are inexperienced, or they are scared, or they are unsure, or don't know how to approach things to get themselves a little bit more, or to get themselves some more from the broadcast. Doesn't necessarily have to be financial, you know? But look, I feel we could talk about this for ages and ages, and there's so many different areas, and obviously we are trying to...
Should I touch on this a tiny bit?
Yeah, if you want to, but keep it quick because I want to move on to a relatively
sure.
important section that I ask most guests.
So the one thing that I wanted to say is, if you're a caster who's like brand new in the industry and you're working one of the events, maybe it's the same event that I'm working, and you're wondering what rate should I take, just send me a message. Because I'm going to tell you the dollar amount, the euro amount instantly. I'm not going to like hide numbers. A talent only fuck themselves when they don't talk about rates. That's when people inadvertently undercut each other. We should all be talking about rates. So if you're one of these people working on one of these events, send me a message. Like I'm very approachable in that sense, and I'll tell you that I wonder if you probably do the same, and I bet like 90% of the casters at our level would probably do the same, because we've got the shared interest, right? We don't want to see everybody undercutting each other and forcing everybody's rates down. I understand if you're newer to the industry and it's your first couple of events, for instance, then sometimes you do have to take a little bit of a pay cut in that sense, but like definitely not for the bigger tournaments, not for... There are circumstances when it works, there are circumstances when it absolutely doesn't work. So like if you're really struggling, negotiation is something that I was very, very anxious about. Still am to some extent, by the way, but especially earlier in my career, where I was kind of just like used by certain organizers, to be honest, where I was taking a way lower rate than was my actual market value, not what I thought I should be earning, but what I could have been earning elsewhere. So I've made those pitfalls. You adapt as a caster much quicker than you think you do, and your worth is probably higher than you actually think, especially if you're newer to this industry and you're like a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a year in the door and you haven't got a lot of experience negotiating. Contact me, contact any of these other casters, and we'll all tell you what the rates are.
Yeah, and I think I can understand as well, because obviously you start to build like a bit of a circle of people that you will go and speak to when you get more experience, when you move up. And I can understand, I feel I'm happy in most cases when it comes to the online stuff at the very least to talk about rates and whatnot. I can understand maybe if you're going for some bigger stuff where there's limited spaces and whatnot, you don't want to go down that road. You much rather cut out the middleman. But I definitely agree with your sentiment of, even if it is just, this is what I'm being offered, is it acceptable? You know, and then a more experienced, someone that you look up to, you may well not get a reply, you know, you may blah, 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 whatever. But I think it is incredibly important, because we've seen initiatives and the spark of an idea, you know, to try and communicate and work things out and make sure that things keep progressing to an acceptable level and a good place, just for them to kind of fizzle out and not massively
100%.
Go anywhere.
By the way, if you're sorry for interrupting you, if you're a caster out there who has taken gigs and you're sat there thinking, am I being fucked over taking this? The answer is yes. If you're thinking that question, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But I get it. You know, it's freelance. It's difficult. It is a cutthroat industry.
Tough.
Just by the nature of it. But I don't think that, you know, other people are as malicious as maybe you think they are in your head, you know,
Sure.
and whatnot. And again, it comes down to young, inexperienced, business acumen, blah blah blah. There is no book on this, you know, within esports at the very least. Well, very true. But you know, navigating yourself through ability wise and whatnot, I think is much easier. Behind the scenes, it can be very hard, very stressful. And I know, you know, I've been put in positions that are hard to deal with, and
all of us, yeah.
Absolutely, you know, and you don't quite know how to move forward, how to approach it. And I think that communication is something that I'm going to, and I'm sure you are as well, endeavor to keep coming, to keep going, to keep improving, you know, because I don't think between us at this level, between newer and more experienced, there's as much of it that goes on, you know. And again, I will hold my hands up. I think I, in the past, have been part of the problem, inadvertently. You know,
yeah, me too.
I feel
me too. It's super easy to fall into that category.
Yeah, I don't think there's really anyone that, you know, is some Machiavellian behind the scenes, like trying to puppet everything, you know, and play everyone off of each other so that they can just walk past while there's a big scrap going, you know, or something like that. There's no like movie villains or whatever. But in the minds of some people, maybe they think there is somewhere, you know.
There are, though. There are a couple of villains.
I don't know. I don't think so. I feel it's hard to get to grips with everybody and know what they're about. But look, like I said, wanted to come to a close on that because we are indeed loving it, right? Bouncing off and chatting. But one of the things that I tend to ask of people that are working, you know, within a certain area and apply that to your certain area is some of the goals that you have when it comes, in your case, to casting. Tea Time yesterday gave me, you know, a very cool look into his mindset behind being a caster. When it comes to goals, he has, like, you know, some short-term things, but not like a fully drawn-out plan. How does yours perhaps match that or differ from that?
So I've got some very boring goals and maybe some more interesting ones. In terms of the boring ones, is to work with the big four or the big five tournament organizers out there. That obviously being, let's not fuck this one up, is ESL, Flashpoint, Blast, and we'll gotta say maybe ESEA and DreamHack in there as well. So those big tournament organizers, obviously, like, I work with a bunch of like decent organizers right now, but that's my goals. That's where I want to progress to. So maybe they're the boring ones, the ones that pretty much everybody in our sphere has. But I think my other goal as well, I think goals in general are really important to have. I think if you do not have goals when you're working in this industry, every single day is going to be a massive slog for you. You're going to be clock watching. You're going to be just begging to get out of your office and to go back home or back downstairs and off of the microphone. If you don't have goals, then every single broadcast is going to be a total slog. And I've seen that time and time again, where people don't care about the broadcasts. They don't care about their career as a whole. They don't put in their 100%, their more than 100%. They don't put in their all, and you see that fizzle out, and it's the saddest thing. We've lost so many talented people in this esports space and seen so many talented people just blow opportunities because they don't have goals and nothing to look forward to. Because if you don't have goals at the end of the day, what am I doing this broadcast for? It's the paycheck, isn't it? I'm doing it for that paycheck, for that couple of £100, and then I can cash it in at the end of the month. But guess what? You're practically doing a 9-to-5 job at that point, and that's not what this career is about. This career is about having goals. So some of my goals as well is to try and improve broadcast on broadcast. And maybe I won't do that. Maybe I won't put in everything every single day sometimes, but that's definitely something that hasn't been a problem recently, but definitely, like, in the earlier years of my career, I would have been on autopilot. And you realize that these opportunities are too, like, kind of precious to be on autopilot, to just be sat back, relaxing, just talking into the microphone. You've got to care. I want to be a more active person in terms of goals as well in the community. I want to be able to do good things and call things out as it is. Like, I think that you need more people in the positions, even if I'm not like totally behind the scenes. I'm not behind the scenes at like massive tournament organizers all of the time. But when you see something that's absolutely wrong, you need to call it out. It's a big thing in this industry where people will call problems out once everybody else has, but nobody's going to be kind of that trailblazer. Like, we do have a couple of figureheads in the industry, and I'm not saying that I want to be a figurehead or anything like that. I'm just saying that I want to call out problems when I see them and try and fix problems. And try and, because I think that it's, people like me and you maybe have a bit more influence than we think, that going to TOs and coming up with these ideas and trying to bring the whole industry forward. If I don't want to be too grandiose in that sense, but that's kind of our responsibility at this point is, we've got to be communicating with TOs all the time and telling them the right way to do things, the wrong way to do things. I signed my first contract in esports Skriv like a couple of weeks ago. I'm 4 years into this job, never signed a contract before. In fact, tell a lie, I've signed maybe 2 contracts from the same TO. It was a pretty abusive contract, to be honest. But this most recent contract is the only kind of like fair contract that I've signed in my esports history. It was brought to me by the TO. And I'll just go on the record. It was Fantasy Expo. Like, Fantasy Expo have been doing contracts, and kind of that guarantees payment, right? That guarantees, it puts all of the terms in text, not just the terms for them, but the terms for me. I need to show up this level of time before, and it just makes sure that there's no bullshit at the end of the day. We know what the payment terms are. We know what all of these terms are. So when you're doing good things, like, you should be kind of praised for that, right? Like, so that's what they've been doing. Like, applause to those guys.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting is that, contracts is a massive conversation with freelancers, and you try, you hear. I've had a couple, so, but I don't know. I think that's good. And to pick up on, I think the crux of what you were talking about, having goals, indeed is I feel also incredibly important, right?
Super important.
And the short-term goals, who you want to work with, when you want to do it by, maybe give yourself a bit of a time. Some of your wants and some of your don't wants, things that you want to try and avoid. And I think it is a trap that I also fell into early on, where, you set a few things, but the broad, I want to be an esports commentator, you can complete within the first 2 or 3 months, technically speaking. You know what I mean? Like, you've gotten to a level where you're no longer stumbling over your words, and maybe you found someone that you can work with regularly that, they run fun tournaments every week. So I think having more definition to it, it's something, like I say, that I'm asking a lot of the guests here with their stuff, because I think it's interesting to see different philosophies and approaches and whatnot. I don't know if you want to get deeper into maybe some of the goals that you have like after casting, or is that a bit too far off, do you think?
Oh, I'm not thinking about that. Like that's definitely something that I'm not even considering right now. Maybe that's naive of me. Because, like, who knows how long your casting careers are going to go on for. There's a good chance that, like, if this year doesn't go, like, absolutely right, that I might be done at the end of the year. There might be a open opportunity for me to quit, like, at any time, right? But, like, it's not something that's on my radar, like, right now at all. I'm not thinking about positions in talent management or whatever. Like, I love my job. I love my job. It's my favorite thing about my life, Skriv, is I get to show up and I get to talk about esports and video games, and I get to just like shout my mouth off, and like it takes all of your concentration, right? Like time just absolutely flies when you're on broadcast. Like, don't get me wrong, there are problems. Like we talk about all of these like TOs shafting people, and the days are sometimes very long, and sometimes if there's something going on outside of the broadcast and you bring that on air, then that can be a tough thing to manage. But I love my job. Like, it's the best job in the world, in my opinion, and nothing is gonna stop me from doing that, at least for the next 6 months.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, life gets in the way from time to time, as I'm sure we're all aware.
Yeah.
But look, that's going to do it for the main interview, mate. I think we'll cut it there.
Sure.
Absolute pleasure. A lot to break down, a lot to talk about, and look into there. And I think we've done a good job of not blowing off the handle. You know what I mean? It was a really good.
Have I still got a job?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
is what I'm trying to say.
enough.
Yeah, absolutely. You're all good, in my opinion. But yeah, it's a conversation with like the content and stuff. I think that's really interesting. That needs to continue to happen, continue to push forwards, and I do indeed hope that the bigger operators within the scene pioneer it, and then maybe we'll see some trickle down so that you and I can do some funny stuff. And have a lot of resources available to do it, and not just in our bedrooms on opposite ends of the country doing an interview like this that maybe has some funny stuff. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for coming on, Jamie. So much fun, and I really hope you enjoyed.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. It let me vent a lot of the stuff that's kind of going on in the industry right now. I know that it goes far deeper than this, to be perfectly honest with you, and realistically, those are things that need to be talked about as well. If there's a time and a place, and maybe that's my responsibility, maybe that's a sort of collective effort, but these issues that we see in the esports industry right now need to be addressed. Just like off the cuff, if you're putting like commentators in an awful position, you shouldn't be in this industry. If you're like outright scamming people, if you're cheating and match fixing, like, just get out of the industry. This isn't a home for you people.
And there you are. There's your PSA. There's your message to close things off. But once again, thanks very much, Jamie.
Thank you.
All right, well, there you have it. As per usual, I hope that you enjoyed. I certainly did. And I really do feel that the sentiment there, the message there, it's not harsh. We're just talking about some of the things that maybe need to be highlighted, improved on, and it's difficult, man. There's no like book on this, right? There's no handhold or course or whatever that you can take quite yet to navigate through everything. So it can be very, very difficult, especially a lot of young people. I'm reiterating some of the points that I've already made, but it's worth doing so. I think that a lot of it comes down to just learning, and sometimes it's more naivety than anything else that leads to some of these difficult situations. But either way, as per usual, drop a comment, leave a like, drop a sub, but let me know how you feel. I am going to try, and I've been watching other interviewers both within esports and out of esports and whatnot, and I am going to try and make a few more, not necessarily like hard hitting, but a bit more free fire straight into the questions, really, as I think that can lead to some interesting areas. It all depends on the guests. Like I say, if I can get some players on, I think they have more history and more things to possibly work off of, in a sense. And I'd love to know what makes them tick as well. But the past couple with other casters, it's been a lot of fun to just jump in myself and give some of my own opinions and have a slightly more laid back attitude. That's how it goes sometimes. That's how it is sometimes. I'm getting comfortable with it, maybe a bit too comfortable, right? Maybe I need to rein some of that in. But these are all thoughts, just stream of consciousness going off. As always, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your support, and I will see you in the next one.